I want to talk to those of you today who feel like you're in a bit of a spiritual no man's land. You love Jesus, He's your everything, but if I'm honest, you've come to hate the church. Maybe you've been hurt, maybe you're tired of the hypocrisy, or maybe you just feel like the modern church doesn't look anything like the Christ you follow. You're what we might call a churchless Christian. But before you click away, I want to invite you into a conversation. Is it possible that in trying to protect your faith from the church, you're actually missing out on the very thing God intended for your growth? Let's look at why Jesus hasn't given up on His bride and why you shouldn't either. It's no secret that church attendance in Western culture has been declining for years. And out of that decline, this new class of believers has emerged. People who think Jesus is wonderful, but think the church is a mess. And let's be real for a moment. I get it. I really do. This isn't just a funny thing to talk about. It's a deeply personal thing for many of you. There are so many valid reasons why people stop going to church. Maybe you were deeply hurt by a leader you trusted. Maybe you experienced a clash with someone in the pews, or you carry family baggage from the way you were raised in the faith. Perhaps you look at the church and feel it's just not up to date with modern thinking. Or worse, it feels like it's full of people who actually aren't Christ-like. I've been there. In fact, some of the worst experiences of my life have happened while I was involved in churches. It was devastating. It was unnerving. It made staying very, very difficult. So, if you're watching this and you're nodding your head because you've been burned, I hear you. I'm not here to excuse the bad behaviour or the poor leadership, but I do want to ask a question that might be uncomfortable. Is this situation what God wants for you? A lot of us have this romanticised idea of the early church. We think that back then, in the book of Acts, everything ran perfectly and smoothly, and it was only centuries later that the bad leadership and corruption started to seep in. But if you actually read the New Testament, you'll see that the church has been a mess from day one. Paul had to constantly call out believers for poor behaviour, for lording it over one another, and for causing genuine harm. If you look at Jesus' message to the 7 churches in Revelation, it's clear evidence that the struggle is nothing new. The idea of churchless Christians isn't even a modern invention. The writer of Hebrews was dealing with this exact issue 2,000 years ago. In Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, the writer says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing." Even back then, people were in the habit of avoiding the gathering. Why? Probably for the same reasons we do today. Because church is hard work. It isn't always rosy and cushy. It's a struggle. But that struggle is actually where the work of God happens. Here is the core of the issue. Many people take the stance that they are true followers of Jesus, and because the people in the church are hypocrites, they shouldn't mix with them. There's a feeling that if I go to church, it will tarnish me or drag me down. But I want to invite you to look at the bigger picture, to look at the church through the eyes of Jesus. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul uses the most intimate language possible to describe Jesus' relationship with the church. He says that Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. He likens the church to Jesus' bride and body. Jesus is the head of that body, and we are the members. Just think about that. If Jesus is intimately connected to his church, how can we say we love the head but hate the body? What right do we have to refuse to associate with something that Jesus died for? Even with all her stains, wrinkles, and blemishes, Jesus sees her as worth dying for. He is intensely interested in what goes on in the church, even with all of its faults. If you say you love Jesus but hate the church, you're saying you love the groom but you can't stand his wife. I wonder sometimes if Jesus feels a bit offended by that. Let's look at this another way. Think about a football team. You're a supporter of that team and you want every player to go out there and play their absolute best every time they take the field. But we know that that doesn't always happen. Players have off days. They go through patches where they don't perform well. Now imagine one of the players does something wrong, maybe even something illegal. Would you stop supporting the entire team just because one player messed up? No, you'd still support the club, because the club isn't just one player. You might want the coach to deal with that person or have them disciplined, but you wouldn't forsake the whole organisation because of the actions of a few. In the same way, when we see leaders fail, and it is devastating when they do, it doesn't mean the whole team is a failure. Jesus doesn't forsake the church when she messes up, so why should we? Sometimes I think we expect people in churches to be perfect. But Jesus is the only one who ever was perfect. Everyone else is a work in progress. If your expectation is that you'll never be offended or that no one will ever do the wrong thing, your expectations are simply too high. Here's a tough truth. Discipleship is not an instantaneous process. In Matthew 28, Jesus told us to go and make disciples. That is a process of connection, or at least involving that. And honestly, it's almost impossible to do that alone. The Christian community is deliberately designed to rub along together. It's meant to be the place where your rough edges are smoothed out. It's the place where you recognise your own humanity and learn to love people despite their flaws. That is what it means to be Christ-like. Jesus experienced all the sin, anger and jealousy of humankind, yet he still loved the people through it all. When we segregate ourselves, we are actually running away from the very challenges that make us grow. We run away from the challenge to forgive. We run away from the challenge of reconciling relationships and talking things out. If everyone took the view that they could just do it on their own because other people are wrong, there would be no church left to propagate the gospel. The gospel survives because bodies of believers stay together, supporting and encouraging each other. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8, Peter writes, "Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Note that he says, above all. Loving each other deeply doesn't mean we just do nice things. It means we experience the sins of our brothers and sisters and we choose to put up with it, deal with it, and live through it. To love deeply is to refuse to abandon people just because they've failed. If you've been away from the church, I want to invite you to reconsider your perspective. Don't let your spiritual immaturity or pride keep you isolated. I'm not saying you have to go back to the specific place that hurt you, but I am saying you need a community. The church isn't a building, it's a gathering of believers. It's where we spur one another on. If you aren't in a gathering, you're less likely to engage in love and good deeds, and you certainly won't be as encouraged as God wants you to be. So, will you try again? Not because the people are perfect, but because Jesus is perfect, and he loves those people. Will you let your view of the church be what Jesus sees in the church? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I know this is a sensitive topic and I want to hear your stories, the good and the bad, but let's keep the conversation Christ-like.